Good morning. Welcome to Decomposing Messiaen. It's a series of videos where we are walking through techniques of my musical language, which is a book written by Olivier Messiaen. Today, chapter 11, song phrases, melodic phrases. In context, the previous two chapters have dealt with sort of the generic shape of melody, and then some tactics for embellishing and enhancing melody through retrograde, inversion, some of the same kinds of approaches that were applied to rhythmic material in the earlier section. Now, just full disclosure, I don't think this is the best chapter in the book, at least in terms of what it sets out to do. The description of melodic structure seems a bit banal to me. He breaks things up into binary phrases, ternary phrases, and seems most interested in how melodic material alternates between a theme and a variation in different ways. That's fine. That's fair enough, and we're certainly going to talk about that. But what I find most interesting in the chapter today is towards the end of the chapter, he lists out a series of examples of different types of musical phrases, examples from his own music, but he makes the statement that these are modeled after melodic material from other composers. And in that kind of throwaway remark is what really fascinates me and what I think we're going to spend most of our time talking about today, which is what he calls the deforming prism of our language. So I'm going to dig into that, and I'm going to start with that. Don't worry, we'll get back to the content, like the technique. But I think when we do that, you'll realize why it's less interesting. We're going to talk about what Messiaen might mean by the prism of his language, and then I'm going to throw myself without a safety net at the piano and see if I can demonstrate that with my own approach to a melody and an idea. I want to take this idea of a language filter, it's a compositional filter, and see what that actually means when I think about the way that my brain thinks and my ideas think, and then see what that prompts in you and the way that you think about ideas and composition and listening. So that's a lot, and why don't I just start in? I'm again reading from the French. A few weeks ago I got a hold of the full French text in a nice edition, and so I'm reading from the French and then translating into English. The French is not that difficult. It's a bit idiomatic in places. But the French, although it is not difficult, does exceed my capability. So the translation is for entertainment purposes only. I am not a French speaker. I only play one on YouTube. So if you're following along, we're in chapter 11 and we're jumping to section 5. Liste de périodes mélodiques, a list of melodic periods. And there's maybe 15 examples that are laid out as different examples of the way that melody can be positioned throughout a song. So he says, dressons une liste de périodes mélodiques. Dresser is put together. So let's put together a list of melodic periods. Yeah, let's do that. That's a good thing to do. Chaque exemple de la liste comprendra une ou plusieurs périodes enchaînées. Each example in the list comprendra represents one or more periods enchaînées, linked together. Au paragraphe 6 du chapitre 14, intitulé Regarde sur d'autres styles, so that's paragraph 6 of chapter 14. Sorry, did I spit coffee? If I spat coffee, I can cut that bit out, right? Au paragraphe 6 du chapitre 14, so chapter 14, which we're not at, we're at chapter 11, so he's anticipating. Regarde sur d'autres styles, just looking at other styles. Nous tâcherons de tirer notre miel de procède d'auteur contemporain. We try to hold our model, we try to hold the distillation of our thinking against other contemporaries. Ici, de même, nous verrons flotter quelques ombres de temps anciennes. Nous saluerons quelques grands noms du temps moderne, mais tous ces emprunts seront passés au prisme déformant de notre langage. In chapter 14, we'll be looking at examples of contemporary models, right? But here, we're going to look at the ombre, the shadows of ancient times. We're going to look at some big names, but all of these examples are passed through our deforming prism. So, for example, after he's given all of the examples, he explains a little bit about what that might mean. Provocative. He says examples 138 and 139. Numbers are difficult for me. 138 et 139 évoque Ravel. Qui aura cru cela? Examples 138, 139 evoke Ravel. Who would have believed it? Question mark. I'm spitting coffee everywhere. Do I have coffee in my beard? I have to be careful. I seem to be getting coffee in my beard, which is then getting spat upon the page as I speak. Qui aurait cru cela? Question mark. Who would have believed that? The surprise that he's speaking. Yes, we are listening to that example. You don't hear Ravel, you hear Messiaen. Les exemples 140 and 141, 114 et 114.1. Und Adam de la Halle pour patron, c'est encore plus invraisemblable. Invraisemblable. Improbable. It is also very improbable, highly unbelievable. Adam de la Halle as a patron, as a model, as a master. I'd like to look up who Adam de la Halle is, and I had absolutely no idea. It turns out he is also known as Adam le Bossu, Adam the Hunchback. He was a French trouvère, poet and musician from 1240 to 1287. His literary and musical works include chansons and jeux partis, which are poetic debates, in the style of the trouvère, and polyphonic motets in the style of early liturgical polyphony. He's a medieval composer. The other names that he mentions in this sort of summary paragraph are Mozart, Manuel de Falla, Bela Bartok, André Jolivet. These are all the models that pass through that deforming prism. So let's bring this back to what I'm trying to say here. Before we look at the specific techniques of phrase structure, before we even look at these examples, what is most interesting to me is that Messiaen is saying that he has these ideas that are represented by other composers, other melodic gestures that he may have heard, been inspired by, been interested by, been influenced by, and that these melodic gestures are the seed of his melodies. Not that he's writing variations on those themes. That is a specific feature that Messiaen doesn't engage in. He's not taking a melody by Ravel. He's not taking a Mozart theme and then applying techniques of melodic variation to that melody. So what is he doing? What does he mean when he says that there's a model based on Ravel or Mozart, Emmanuel de Falla, that passes, back to the language here, au prisme deformant de notre langage, the deforming prism. I was just checking to see if there's a better translation than deforming, because I don't think he means mutilation. I think he means transformation. I'll continue to say deforming, but I'm starting to think of it more as the transforming prism of our language. It's taking the object and then applying a different mold to it. The substance is the original model, and then the language is the mold. And the language is the subject of the entire book, the technique of my language. The overlap between the technique and the prism is central. It's a one-to-one relationship. So, seront passés au prisme déformant de notre langage, recevront de notre style du sang différent, receiving from our style a different blood, sang, like very physical content. Une couleur rythmique et mélodique imprévue, an unexpected rhythmic and melodic color. Right? So rhythm and melody are the two elements that we've been talking about in the book to date. Remaining, of course, the chapters on harmony and modes. Et rechercher suneront pour détruire la moindre ressemblance avec le modèle. La moindre ressemblance is the least resemblance. Pour détruire, to destroy any remaining resemblance to the original model. So I really do get the feeling that in this paragraph he's revealing something quite interesting. Not shocking. I mean, this is how we all accommodate musical material, right? We hear something, and it reminds us of something. We hear it as sound, and then it passes into our brain, and our brain applies a network of memory to that music. If it's a piece we've heard before, we may remember who we heard it with the first time, or we may remember the event that we heard it at. It could be associated with an extreme emotional experience. It could be a marriage or a funeral, or it could be music that we associate with shared events in our community. So they're not necessarily just individual memories. There are pieces that serve that purpose and become associated with certain kinds of attributes within that network. We are more or less aware of that network. We choose certain kinds of music because we want to think about certain things, or we want to feel a certain way. What does that mean? That a piece of music makes us feel something. How does it do that? For sure, one of the things that we talk about here a lot is that Messiaen uses the rhythmic and harmonic overlay of non-retrogradability and limited transposition to create a unitary experience that entrains the body and the mind. That, I think, is one of the central theses of our review of this work. So there is physiological component of the music that will suggest a feeling, because it's suggesting something directly to the body. But beyond that, how else does it work? It's unique to the individual, but it's also shared between individuals. So there's this sort of context where the network extends out beyond our brain and our body and becomes a shared experience of some kind. And what is that? How does that work? So we have this music that we hear that makes us feel something. So one way of looking at composition is that it is just a different type of hearing. It's just hearing something that hasn't yet been written down, or something that you are remembering. But now the craft of composition is to spend more time on that context than it is on the actual idea. Right? This is, I think, an interesting way of looking at composition. You have an idea, a melody, or a harmony, or a rhythm, or something. But as the composer, what are you really hearing? What am I really hearing? I'm hearing the idea, but I'm also hearing a bunch of presumptions, presuppositions about how that idea will be received. Now, I obviously have no control over the reception of an idea. Messiaen wrote his music and did used all of the techniques of his craft to guide the listener towards a particular reception of the idea. Because the liturgical import of his music is primary. Now, I don't share that, and the music I write varies depending on the medium. Like, my intent is different. If I'm writing at the piano, I'm quite often writing music that is intimate and intended to be shared with a particular group of people who I know will hear it and position it within that context. It's music I've written, that I'm playing. They've known me for 30 years, 40 years. And they want to hear the music because they know me. And that's kind of the extent of it. As opposed to Messiaen, who is writing music for performance in the Catholic liturgy for his organ music, or deliberately intending to transform the concert experience into a liturgical experience. Now, when I write electronic music, I have a slightly different perspective, because what I'm trying to do there is a bit more grounded in kind of a spiritual notion. I'm really looking to work within that physical entrainment world. I like the idea of sound that is captivating and compelling in kind of a shamanic or storytelling way, right? Like, you listen to the electronic music, and I do expect a different type of physiological reaction to occur. Now, to the extent that it happens is a measure of the success, more or less, of that particular piece. But the idea then that network of memory overlays a network of compositional craft. And that is this deforming prism, right? And Messiaen had an arsenal of extraordinary compositional craft in all of the techniques that he's describing here. Someone like me, who is an enthusiastic composer, but one with certainly less experience and a different set of intentions and a different level of maturity of my craft, the output that I write comes through a different prism, right? It comes through the unique set of networks within my brain of memory and attributes, and then the equally unique constraints and strengths of my compositional practice. But I just finished a set of pieces for piano and electronics. And when I finished them, I put them on YouTube, and I thought, this actually does a pretty good job of summarizing my strengths and weaknesses, which in turn represents the current state of my particular deforming prism, right? In any given moment in that piece, there's an idiomatic arrangement of electronics and piano. They sound good together. They do what I want them to do. It's a part of the skill that I think is forming itself well within my prism. But even though the music is, I think, 8 minutes long, 7 or 8 minutes long, it's clearly a series of shorter sections that are put together because I don't have a particularly good ability to extend ideas or to think and to realize large structures at the piano. In the purely electronic world, it's different because I have a sense of whether you want to call it drone or glitch or whatever. There's a style that I have that I can utilize, that I'm familiar with and I understand, and it lends itself to long form pieces, relentless long form pieces. So I wrote that in the description of the music, and it really did feel like, this is a really good summary of where I'm at right now. One of the reasons I started this study was I thought that by applying myself to this text, I would absorb some of the lessons. We'll see how that works. The real reason I started this study was, of course, because I think that the study of music, the comprehension of music, is a spiritual necessity that represents an input into our understanding of our own mortality, and that Messiaen, in particular, is an excellent use case for that study. So, une couleur rythmique et mélodique, imprévue ou fantasie, et recherche s'uniront pour détruire la moindre ressemblance avec le modèle. The model is no longer visible in the output. I mentioned at the start that this is not my favorite chapter, and it just seems a bit banal. But let me put that aside, and I won't go through the 2 pages of examples of different melody, but let me try to summarize what I think is at the core of what Messiaen is saying. Messiaen thinks of melodic structure as the alternation between a theme and then some variation on that theme. And that alternation can be explicit in terms of a binary form. We have theme, modulated material, a return to the theme. Ternary is just an extension of that. Theme, modulation, theme. Or it could be more of a long form piece where you have a theme, and then that theme is broken up into an antecedent and consequent, or some smaller sections, and then those smaller sections are focused on in a different capacity throughout the piece. If you have a theme with 3 ideas in it, the next main section may focus on the development of that first. I'm trying to get my hands organized the right way here. That first section, and then the second section may dig into the material of the second idea, and then the third. So the example he gives for that comes from the Quartet for the End of Time. If you go listen to either of the Louange pieces, they are nothing but an extended melody, and you can hear that there's a core melodic idea that lends itself to kind of a deconstruction into elements that can then in each section be developed. But there's nothing really particularly earth-shattering about that. And in fact, Messiaen, to me, is less interesting in this context than someone like Debussy, who really did think about melody as non-repeating, ever-unfolding exposition of form and melody. And Messiaen isn't like that, right? Messiaen is rhythmically profound, and his melodies are extraordinary, but when you look at them, they're extraordinary in the way that the melody glides over the rhythm. I think, right? There's not massive invention. This is not a criticism. This is a view of the music. The melodic content in Messiaen, of course, evolves and unfolds and is varied, but the strength of the melodic formats that Messiaen prefers is twofold. It is the unfolding of enormous ideas at different relationships, sort of like a mobile. And within that, it is the alternation between ideas, often quite mechanical alternation. I think that's a distinction that doesn't quite come through in how Messiaen is talking about structure in this chapter. Many of his chapters are fundamental and basic, but they are fundamental and basic because he's trying to build a framework to talk about something interesting and complex. I don't think that happens here. Like, binary form is just not difficult to talk about, and it's just not that interesting to me. Having said that, it is fundamental to the melodic forms that Messiaen prefers. He mentioned Adam de la Hall. That prompted me to remember in the interviews with Samuel Claudel, Messiaen talks about the rhythms that he used in Kente Yojaya, which is a piano piece that was written after the musical techniques. But he refers to Claude LeJeune, who's a Renaissance composer. And in those interviews, those interviews with Claudel were much later. They were, I think, originally from the 60s, and then they revisited the interview content again in the 80s or later. So they're 30, 40 years past the writing of the technique book. But many of the ideas survived that time. They were central to Messiaen's compositional focus. So he describes this. The choruses of Claude LeJeune are divided into couplets and refrains. The melodic style of cinq rechants, which is one of Messiaen's choral pieces, and the spirit which animates it is equally found in the music of the troubadours. Remember Adam de la Hall, the troubadours and the trouvères. There's no doubt a distinction between a troubadour and a trouvère, but in my mind they both are medieval singers. In the song forms of these composers, I've especially chosen l'alba from l'aube, which means dawn. So it's a song in which each sentence is terminated by the voice of a night watchman who announces daybreak and the separation of lovers. So in this case, the song form has a particular context, that context being the dawn context, and then the refrain and structure of that Messiaen has taken. He has distilled it, and he has synthesized it through his prism into this piece. So if you look at his music where there may be characteristic rhythms that appear, they're often the synthesis of either the Hindu rhythms or something that comes from the Renaissance here. That's the F minor prelude from Book 2, and I'm just going to turn around and start playing, cut it down on over. So probably about 10 minutes. I'm going to give myself 5 to 10 minutes to just noodle around and come up with four or five bars. So just as a reminder of which prelude this is. the introduction. The section I like is right here at around measure 48, so I'll play into it. So this bit here. This bit. So,